They abandoned me at 4 months old. Now, they're suing me for my grandfather's $3.4 million estate. What would you do if the people who walked away from you suddenly came back for what they think is theirs? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. I never imagined I'd be sitting here today, facing the weight of a courtroom where the two people who should have protected me most are now fighting against me for a piece of my grandfather's estate. I had no choice but to watch as they walked into the room with their lawyers, their expressions cold, distant, and completely unrecognizable. It was a scene that felt like something out of a surreal drama, but it was my reality. How did it come to this? Growing up, I never knew the warmth of parental affection in the way that most children do. My first memory, if you could call it a memory, was that of a crib, darkened by the shadows of a room that I now realize was empty. My parents had left me when I was just 4 months old. They hadn't disappeared, no. That would have been easier. They hadn't died. They hadn't been swept away by some tragedy. They had chosen to leave me. It wasn't like they'd said goodbye. It wasn't even dramatic. One day they just stopped coming. My grandparents, my mother's parents, had stepped in, taking me in like I was their own flesh and blood. I never asked questions because I never knew there was anything to ask. In their eyes, I was their child. They treated me like one, and for all intents and purposes, they were my parents. Their love was the only love I knew. It was strange, I suppose, to grow up with these two people who weren't my biological parents, but who loved me as if I were their own. There were no hints, no whispers of the life I might have had if they'd kept me. As far as I was concerned, my life was a quiet, steady rhythm of family dinners, school projects, and birthday celebrations. I had no reason to believe I was any different from the other kids. Then one day, when I turned 18, my grandmother sat me down. Her face was pale, and there was a tremor in her hands. She wasn't like that. She was the rock of our family, the one who always seemed to have everything in control. But today, she was holding something in her hands that I had never seen before, a thick envelope with a lawyer's seal on it. It was a document, and as she handed it to me, she said, "There's something you need to know." The letter inside was addressed to me, but the name on the letter was not one I recognized, my biological mother's name, the woman who had left me all those years ago. It was a legal notice. The letter explained that my biological parents were suing for the inheritance of my late grandfather's estate. The estate that had been the center of my family for generations, the house I'd grown up in, the wealth that had sustained our family's lifestyle. They wanted what was theirs, or at least what they believed was theirs. The letter didn't explain everything, but the tone was clear. My biological parents, who had abandoned me at 4 months old, now saw an opportunity to claim the money, the property, the legacy that had been my grandfather's. To them, I was just a name, a connection to the wealth they felt entitled to. I sat there, stunned, unable to breathe. I stared at the letter, at my grandmother, and the world around me seemed to tilt. How could they do this? How could they, after all these years, come back into my life like this, demanding something that wasn't even theirs to take? They can't just do this, I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. They can, my grandmother replied softly, and they will try. The legal battle had begun, and with it came years of bitterness, anger, and confusion. My grandparents, though they had raised me, had never formally adopted me. Legally, I was still my biological parents' child. And so, my parents who had abandoned me, who had left me in the hands of strangers when I was just a baby, now had a claim to my grandfather's fortune, a fortune they never knew or cared about until they saw the opportunity for themselves. At first, it felt like a nightmare. I couldn't understand why this was happening, why they were willing to come back into my life now. after so many years of absence. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't about me, not really. It wasn't about the fact that I was their child. It was about the money, the wealth, the life they could never build for themselves. They saw me not as their daughter, but as a way to claim something they thought belonged to them. The legal battle dragged on for months. Every letter, every court date, felt like a slap in the face. My grandparents, who had raised me with love, were now being pitted against the very people who should have cared for me, the people who'd walked away without a second thought. My grandfather had left his estate to me in his will, with the understanding that I was his family, and that no one else, especially not the people who had abandoned me, would come to claim it. But now, I found myself in a fight for something I never asked for, something I never wanted, and something I couldn't even feel ownership of. As the court case progressed, it became clear just how deep the animosity ran. My biological parents had found their lawyer, a sharp, ruthless man who was determined to make me give up the estate. They were aggressive, cold in their pursuit of the money, and at every turn, they made it known that they saw me as nothing more than a roadblock, an obstacle in their path to wealth. But what hurt the most was the realization that they didn't even care about me. They didn't care that I had grown up without them, that I had been raised by people who loved me deeply. They didn't care that my life had been shaped by others, that I had formed my own identity, my own history, that didn't include them. To them, I was simply a piece of property one they believed was rightfully theirs. In the courtroom, I had to listen to their lawyer tear apart my grandparents' credibility, questioning every choice they had made in raising me. He painted them as opportunists, as people who had manipulated the system to claim a child they had no legal right to. And while my grandparents sat silently, my heart shattered for them. They weren't criminals. They were my family, the people who had given me everything. The days grew longer as the case dragged on. I spent countless hours with my lawyer, gathering evidence of the years of love and care my grandparents had given me. We had letters, pictures, old family videos that painted the story of my childhood, a childhood that wasn't tainted by the absence of my biological parents, but was full of the warmth and security that only true family could provide. But the battle was far from easy. My biological parents, with their sharp lawyer, had one weapon they knew would work in their favor: the law. In their eyes, I was still a minor when my grandfather's estate was inherited. It didn't matter that I had been raised by my grandparents, the people who had actually given me a sense of belonging. The law was clear. They had legal rights as my biological parents, and nothing would erase that. It wasn't just the courtroom drama that weighed on me, though. It was the constant mental toll of being torn between two families, one that had loved me and raised me, and the other that was only interested in me as a means to an end. There were moments when I wondered why this was happening to me, why they had come back after so many years of silence. And I had to face the truth. They had never really cared about me. They had cared about the money, the estate, the legacy they thought they were entitled to. The legal proceedings continued for what felt like years, but eventually, there was a turning point. The case, which seemed destined to drag on forever, finally came to a head when my biological parents dropped the case. They didn't win. They didn't get the estate. And after all the legal battles, after all the drama and fighting, I was left with the inheritance, but I was left with a bitter taste in my mouth. What does it mean to inherit something when it feels like it's not really yours? The money, the property, these were just things. The love, the security, the sense of belonging that my grandparents had given me, that was what mattered. In the end, the estate didn't make me whole. It didn't fill the emptiness left by the people who had abandoned me so long ago. The case ended. I sat with my grandparents, in the house that was now mine, and I realized something profound. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love. It's about the people who show up, who stay, and who care when it's hard. My grandparents had given me that. My biological parents, on the other hand, had never even bothered to show up until it was convenient for them. They had tried to take from me what wasn't theirs, but in the end, they couldn't take away the one thing that truly mattered, the love and security that my grandparents had given me. And no court case, no amount of money could change that.